my hope was that by selecting out one beluga whale who had bladder cancer and juxtaposing it with my own bladder cancer diagnosis, that the reader would come both to care about beluga whales with cancer and also see this vulnerability in the narrator, who up to this point had been a fairly authoritative biologist, helping the reader through all this fairly complex science. But now I'm kind of opening myself up, and you see a scene of me as this patient who decides that the answer to all her problems are just to go out and start partying. In my later books, I struck a kind of different tone. So to just kind of catch you up with what happened in my life between living downstream in 1997 and my next book in 2001, is that I eloped and got pregnant and had a baby. And so I became a mother at 40 and a cancer patient at 20, which I know isn't the order most people live their lives in, but that's how it happened to me. And so I moved then to Cornell University to write a book about pregnancy. So again, my autobiography kind of leads my science. And I spent 4 years at Cornell learning the ins and outs of a field called fetal toxicology. So having faith, unlike living downstream, proceeds in chronological order, right? So in living downstream, I'm already this biologist in my 30s who begins the book, and you don't see me as my 20s until the middle of the book. But having faith, starts at the beginning. When I find out I'm pregnant, starts with the egg and the sperm, and goes all the way through age 2, when the breastfeeding relationship between mother and child is just beginning to come to an end. So it exactly spans the symbiotic period of life between a mother and a child. And it's told in a kind of diaristic fashion. It's all in present tense. And my hope and intent there was to make visible the immediacy of pregnancy, to make it to make it very in the present moment. And the tone I tried to strike mostly was a tone of kind of lyricalness and loveliness, because writing about birth defects and miscarriages and preterm labor is actually far scarier to people than even cancer. So I needed a language of real loveliness to describe the opera of embryological development, and to really give readers an appreciation for the beauty of how a human body gets itself formed. And then I can introduce kind of the darker currents of how toxic trespass can sabotage all that loveliness. So here's a sample from chapter 4, and my intent here was to try to emphasize the exquisite communion between our bodies and the external environment that we inhabit. Because I think there's this false notion that we have about pregnancy, like 2001 Space Odyssey, right? That the fetus is like a little astronaut tethered inside the mother's ship, protected against the hostile outer world by this, the absolute protection of the placenta. But it turns out biologically it doesn't work that way at all. The placenta is not a barrier, it's an open doorway. And in some ways it's a magnifying glass for all the chemical contaminants that the mother's body are exposed to, that you actually get higher levels in the uterus than you do in the mother's body. And so to make that visual, to kind of show my readers how that works, I, in chapter 4, decided to illustrate it with the scene of an amniocentesis. So this is a scene in which I returned to Boston to lay down on the same ultrasound table where I had once been scanned for signs of tumor as a cancer patient. And now I'm getting my very first prenatal ultrasound. And so the reader knows from previous narrative that this is a big moment for me to do this. And reminding myself, if they see signs of growth this time, it's a good thing, not a bad thing, right? And so I'm very nervous going into this. And then I get to hold my amniotic fluid in my hands after it's all over. So I'll skip all the nerve-wracking part and jump right to the part where they hand me the vials of amniotic fluid. The needle is out. We're done. The mood is still upbeat. The obstetrician hands the pair of vials to the technician, who holds them up to the light like glasses of fine wine. Nice color, she says. Do you want to hold them? And she passes the vials, hot as blood, into my hands. The fluid inside is pale gold. it seems to glow. Well, it's like liquid amber, I sputtered. It's like an amber jewel. It occurs to me that amniotic fluid is the loveliest substance I have ever seen. The obstetrician touches my arm. That's baby pee, she says, smiling. We like it yellow. It's a sign of good kidney functioning. I look at the vials again. Oh, right, I say. The obstetrician is finishing up. She reminds me to drink plenty of water today. Drink plenty of water. Before it is baby pee, amniotic fluid is water. I drink water, and it becomes blood plasma, which suffuses through the amniotic sac and surrounds the baby, who also drinks it. And what is it before that? Before it is drinking water, amniotic fluid is the creeks and rivers that fill reservoirs. It is the underground water that fills wells. And before it is creeks and rivers and groundwater, amniotic fluid is rain. When I hold in my hands a tube of my own amniotic fluid, I am holding a tube full of raindrops. Amniotic fluid is the juice of oranges that I had for breakfast, and the milk I poured over my cereal, the honey I stirred into my tea. It is inside the green cells of spinach leaves and the damp flesh of apples. It is the yolk of an egg. When I am looking at amniotic fluid, I am looking at rain falling on orange groves. I am looking at melon fields, potatoes in wet earth, frost on pasture grasses. The blood of cows and chickens is in this tube. The nectar gathered by bees and hummingbirds is in this tube. Whatever is inside hummingbird eggs is also inside my womb. Whatever is in the world's water is here in my hands. Now that chapter goes on to describe evidence from a lab in Los Angeles that shows the presence of dioxins, PCBs, and pesticides in human amniotic fluid. So even in this inland ocean in which the unborn marine mammal baby swims in, we've contaminated that inland sea with toxic chemicals, and then the effects on the immune system from the swallowing and the inhaling of the amniotic fluid and the exposure of the interior of the embryonic body to those chemicals is what follows in that chapter. But before I present the dark side, I wanted to give my readers a sense of just the loveliness of amniotic fluid and its communion with the water cycle. There's a kind of two-way reciprocity between the interior and the exterior worlds. So pregnant women are not sealed off from the ecological world. In fact, you're never more ecological than when you're pregnant because you're actually breathing more air, you're drinking more water, and you're eating more calories when you're pregnant. So the ecological world is streaming through you in a faster way when you're pregnant than when you're not pregnant. And after all, a body of a baby is made up of the rearranged molecules of all the air, food, and water that come into a woman's body. That's what a human body is knitted out of. So I wanted to present that to my readers first, and I hope to do it in the form of a personal epiphany. So rather than me, the biologist, saying to you, the reader, look, amniotic fluid is rainwater, you get it? I wanted to put myself into a vulnerable position where I'm laying there on the table as a patient. I mistake the yellow color of amniotic fluid, and I'm having a sort of dopey, semi-religious moment, and suddenly I realize I'm looking at baby pee. And that hopefully then the kind of stupidness of me in that moment is something the readers could actually sympathize with. And then my epiphany that follows, that this is an ecological substance, is something that doesn't come, my readers enjoy that epiphany and experience at the same time as the narrator in the story does, rather than me, the biologist, kind of giving it to you in a pedagogical way. So striking a lyrical tone was important to me in having faith, but sometimes I felt that that was too precious, and I needed a little comedy. And comedy is really a tricky form to work in, because there's nothing worse than trying to be funny and failing. And I never attempted it with Living Downstream. And Living Downstream is a terribly serious, very earnest book. There's a lot more humor in having faith, and part of that is just because I got bolder as a writer and better at some of the carpentry of writing, so I learned how to do dialogue better. And dialogue is a great place to inject humor.